was week 4 of the COVID-19 lockdown, and Pamela Drysdale had had enough. The cosy, clandestine weekend with Keith had meant to be just that, a weekend. Yet here she was, still, in this so-called romantic hideaway cottage come mobile home up a muddy track in the middle of flat agricultural land. From the window, all she could see were miles and miles of brassicas, ranked in straight lines under a leaden sky. She gave a deep sigh as she appraised herself in the bathroom mirror. That chic, asymmetric haircut she'd been so thrilled with now just looked odd, as though it had been done by a 7-year-old with blunt scissors. And her roots! Oh, God! She hadn't realised she had so much grey. There it was, a straight line of truth either side of her parting. Slipping off Keith's shirt, she retrieved her underwear from where it had been drying on the radiator. Those silly bits of lace, once a delicate white, now had a decidedly grey tinge and looked anything but alluring. Oh, for a comfortable bra and some proper-sized knickers. Keith's whistling could be heard from the kitchen along with the clatter of cups and plates. He was a man who couldn't do anything quietly. Every task was accompanied by a bum-ba-bum-ba-bum-bum or a running commentary on what he was doing. There we are, let's get the washing up done. Or this whistling with no discernible tune. She'd found it quite jolly at first. Now it was driving her nuts. It had been so exciting in the beginning. A mild flirtation across the open plan office. Keith was probably in his late 40s like her, and he looked kind of swarthy. He was so likeable and funny, and more than that, he made her feel attractive. He would compliment her on her clothes and her hair, and he'd leave a Ferrero Rocher on her keyboard. Pamela bought herself a new skirt and silky blouses and started putting on a bit of extra makeup, actually, just to look forward to going to work now. It was a long time since Derek had noticed what she wore or admired her hair. Dull, dependable Derek. A man who never wavered from routine, who slept in striped pyjamas, wore a vest under his shirt, summer and winter, and wore an old tweed jacket with leather patches on the elbows. In short, a man who'd been middle-aged all his life. But suddenly, there was a new spring in Pamela's step and a lightness in her heart. She and Keith had taken to having lunch together, first in the staff canteen and then the local pub over the road. Eating their crisps and sandwiches, she became aware of his proximity, the pungent, spicy scent of him. Was he pressing his thigh against hers on purpose? Well, it made Pamela feel all hot. So when he suggested they go for a drink after work, she thought to herself, why not? Derek could manage with a ready meal and she could have a bit of toast when she got in. She'd be back in time for Neighbours from Hell. The Nag's Tail was all horse brasses and upholstered banquettes divided into cosy booths. She and Keith slid into one of these. She'd chosen a gin and tonic with ice and a slice, while Keith supped on a pint of mild, and they shared a packet of pork scratchings. As they chatted, Keith's thigh once again pressed close to Pamela's, and his arms slid along the back of the banquette. She felt a little thrill of excitement. Oh, he was so funny and refreshing, and he knew loads of jokes, some quite rude. And after a second gin and tonic, she found herself weeping with laughter. Outside in the car park, it had started to rain, and it was later than Pam had expected. At this rate, she might just catch the second half of How Clean Is Your House? Keith stopped the car at the end of Pamela's road, leaned towards her and planted a kiss on her mouth. Not a long, lingering one, but it wasn't just a peck either. We must do this again, he said. And they did do it again. They became Thursday night regulars at the Nag's Tail. She told Derek it was a weekly do with colleagues, which it was, but just one colleague, Keith. On Thursdays, Pamela wore clothes that were contrived to be more accommodating to his explorations of her body. No need for tights in this warm weather, and you could move so much more easily in an A-line skirt. How Clean Is Your House was replaced by a bit of slap and tickle in Keith's car. In the office, it was difficult to act with proper decorum when they met by the coffee machine. The lunches at the local pub were fraught with yearning. But it was amazing, however, what Keith managed to do to her under the pub table while she gazed fixedly at the dartboard on the opposite wall. Keith told her about a nice little holiday cottage in a discreet place where they could get to know each other and have a bit of fun. Could she manage a couple of days away? Not long after this, Derek's mother had one of her turns and needed Derek to look after her. Pamela couldn't believe her luck. She took the day off work and spent a feverish morning shopping in Debenham's lingerie department. At 12, she managed to get an appointment at the hairdresser's for a cut and colour, and after a somewhat painful session at the beauty salon round the corner, she was waxed and ready to go. At the end of the road, she waited self-consciously with her overnight bag. The neighbours might have wondered where she was going with the strange man if she'd been picked up outside the house. True to his word, Keith arrived looking dapper in slacks and a smart Pringle sweater with that same spicy aroma about him. It was a bright, sunny day, and Pamela felt almost breathless with excitement and the promise of delights to come. After driving for an hour or so, they stopped at a pub for a spot of dinner. Pamela wasn't hungry, but Keith said it would save them cooking when they got to the cottage. So she managed a small chicken in the basket. She felt young and attractive in her new white jeans with lycra and the red lacy top that she bought that morning, and the high wedge-heeled shoes she'd also treated herself to made her feel long, lean and leggy. It was dark by the time they arrived, but a silver moon shone overhead as they unloaded their bags. Keith unlocked the door and suddenly swept her up into his arms and carried her over the threshold. So that's what they mean by a night of passion, Pamela thought to herself as she lay gazing at the ceiling amid the tangled sheets. Keith was an energetic lover, took her to heights of pleasure she'd never before experienced. He looked very different without his clothes on. He had a bit of a tummy and a hairy back, which came as a bit of a surprise, but all in all, he was a good-looking man, and he thought she was beautiful. She could hear the strains of "This Guy Is in Love With You" coming from the kitchen, and the sound of a kettle coming to the boil. Keith had told her he was a bit of a crooner, and she wondered whether his choice of song was especially for her. He arrived back in the bedroom wearing an apron with a rose clenched between his teeth and carrying a tray of mugs of tea and slices of toast and jam. After he'd eaten, he gently took the tray, carefully placing it on the floor. All that cooking had tired him out, he winked, and he rejoined her in bed. And that took care of the rest of the morning. In the evening, Keith made a very spicy chili con carne. He opened a bottle of red wine. He told her that red wine went straight to his loins, and she secretly wondered where loins were located on the human body. I mean, she'd always associated them with beef and pork. And then she thought about loincloths and mystery solved. After watching a bit of Alan Carr on TV, they were both ready for an early night. The red wine had given Pamela a bit of a headache, and she was concerned about the effects of that spicy chili. She looked forward to snuggling down under the duvet together. But Keith had other ideas. Just as she was about to get into bed, he presented her with a gift-wrap package. Pamela loved presents and eagerly tore the paper off. Inside, she found a pair of rabbit ears on an Alice band, a tiny pink leotard with a white fluffy pom-pom on the bottom and some fishnet stockings. Keith beamed at her expectantly, and Pamela smiled weakly back. She was worried whether he bought the right size. I mean, she was closer to a 14 than a 12, and that pink leotard looked decidedly skimpy. I mean, not much give. She picked up the whole lot and went into the bathroom and locked the door. Thankfully, the leotard was a bit more capacious than expected, which was a mercy, but the stockings were a nightmare to get on. When fully stretched, they only just came past her knees, and the elastic tops were extremely tight. Anyway, Keith was expecting her to make an appearance, so she donned the rabbit ears, slipped on her wedge heels, unlocked the bathroom door, and made her entrance. There followed some difficult, not to say uncomfortable manoeuvres in the loss of a rabbit ear and a torn stocking, but in the end it was surprisingly fun once the leotard and Pamela's wedge heels had been discarded. Oh, she was having a lovely time, and Keith had such stamina. She woke to the sound of the radio and the smell of frying bacon. She slipped on Keith's shirt, like they do the morning after in romantic films, and joined him in the kitchen. He was listening to the news with a serious expression on his face. Pamela knew all about the nasty virus that was going round in foreign countries and how some people had brought it back from their skiing holidays. What she hadn't expected was to be told that everyone in the UK had to stay put for the foreseeable future. She thought about Derek. He would still be with his mother, so that was a blessing, but her main worry was a practical one. I mean, what was she going to wear? "Don't fret," said Keith. "I've got some more outfits you can try." It began to rain. It hammered loudly on the thin roof and lashed at the windows. Pamela felt distinctly chilly in the little French maid's dress and apron. At least the accompanying stockings were more substantial, but not by much. Her white jeans with lycra were steaming on the radiator along with her cotton cardie, having been washed in the sink after a mishap with some red wine. She tried not to be cross with Keith, but why couldn't he just sit still and watch Holmes Under the Hammer instead of fiddling with her buttons? She wondered how many more outfits Keith had hidden away. She had a feeling if there was an episode of Holby, that might prompt the appearance of a nurse's outfit. She didn't really mind, but there was no warmth in them, and they didn't look right with her cardie. Over the next few days, they watched quite a bit of TV. Keith liked documentaries about animals, and Pamela learned a lot about the breeding habits of macaque monkeys and why humpback whales have knobbly heads. She had a text message from Derek saying he hoped she was still having fun with her colleagues despite the lockdown, and that he and his mother were playing a lot of Scrabble. Pamela had never liked Scrabble, but for some reason it sounded quite appealing. As she and Keith passed another wet evening watching a programme about the travails of the African dung beetle. The weather cheered up at last, so Keith suggested a stroll. But outside the static caravan was a sea of mud after all that rain. "Those wedges will keep you out of the worst of it," he joked. But Pamela wasn't laughing. Grimly, she slid her feet into the massive pair of Wellingtons. They trudged down the track to the main road and back. Just outside the front door, she missed her footing, slipped and fell in a huge, wet, filthy puddle. She sat there and began to cry. Miserably, she looked up at Keith, waiting for her to help her up. But he had a funny look on his face. "I've always wanted to get down and dirty," he said, with a grin. The atmosphere was decidedly tense after that. Pamela managed to heave herself up and clamber through the front door, kicking off her wellies. She went. She made straight for the bathroom, slammed the door, and ran herself a hot bath. "I'll join you in a minute," he called through the door. No chance, she seethed as she peeled off her muddy clothes. Everything was caked, even her hair. They'd long since run out of shampoo, so Pamela had to make do with a bit of imperial leather from the wash basin. Wrapping a towel around herself as securely as she could, Pamela emerged from the bathroom to find Keith waiting for her with a mug of tea and a custard cream. He sat her down at the kitchen table and watched as she sipped her drink. "I thought a bit of mud wrestling was a step too far," he admitted. There on the bed lay the French maid's dress with its frilly apron, the long black stockings and feather duster. "I'll soon warm you up," he grinned. A cold wind had started blowing. It was the kind that buffeted the caravan with each gust. Pamela took to staying in bed until lunchtime, just to keep warm. As she lay there under the duvet, she thought about her bedroom at home. The new wallpaper in soft shimmering peach with tiny flowers that Derek had put up. The pretty curtains she'd made that matched them perfectly. The pale wooden chest of drawers full of her underwear. Comfortable cotton pants and bras you could forget you had on, keeping everything in place when you ran up the stairs. Her thoughts turned to Derek. Dear, dependable Derek, who quietly got on with things and would do anything for her. "If you're happy, I'm happy," he would say. Well, she wasn't happy now. She was downright miserable. She wanted to go home. She wanted to sleep undisturbed in clean sheets next to Derek, who would wake her only to ask her if she wanted a cup of tea in the morning. Calm, dependable Derek. She found Keith on the sofa, watching Escape to the Country on the telly. "I think it's time you took me home," she said. He looked up at her sadly. "I was wondering when you were going to say that," he said. There was very little for Pamela to pack in her overnight bag. She was taking home even less than she would come with. The no longer white jeans had come apart in various places due to overwashing and getting caught on a sharp protrusion on the back of the radiator. There was nothing for it but for to wear the French maid's dress and stockings for the journey home. Just as well it was dark and that Derek was at his mother's. Just after 11, they pulled up outside Pamela's house. The road was deserted and quiet. Keith patted her knee and kissed her on the cheek. "Do you fancy a quickie before you go in?" he suggested, and she wasn't entirely sure he was joking. "Best not," she replied, gathering up her overnight bag and carefully getting out of the car. She knew she must look a strange sight standing on the doorstep, keys in hand, wearing the French maid's dress that barely covered her bottom, laddered stockings and her tatty high-heeled wedges. But she'd soon be in her own home. Oh, a lovely home with the smell of forest pine, essential oil. Oh, how she'd missed it. "Is that you, Pam?" came a familiar voice as she let herself in. "Mother and I were just having a cup of tea." "You're just in time,"